Week 12 of college football. And yes, the Big Ten West is very much up for grabs. Can you believe it? And you look back a few weeks ago, and the Hawkeyes were completely down and out, at least according to a lot of people. Some may accuse me of kind of writing them off. I don't think I ever did that. Certainly with this defense, we've said this many times that the Iowa defense keeps this team in games and gives them a chance to win, even when the offense is dreadful, as it has been on many occasions. So you got to give Kirk Ferentz, Phil Parker, and that entire defensive staff credit because they've kept this team together even during difficult times. We'll see if the offense can produce something. If you missed my preview for Iowa, Minnesota, you can check that out as well. But we're going to get to my week 12 picks all across the country, and then I'll give you my pick for Iowa, Minnesota. We start in the Big Ten, Illinois and Michigan. Big game. Michigan 19.5-point favorites in Ann Arbor. I've got Michigan winning. I think Illinois will cover. I think there's too much fight left in the Illini. Certainly Michigan's playing for a playoff consideration, but they're a week out from that game against Ohio State. Do you smell trap game? Perhaps. But they are at home, and they've got more to play for than just the Ohio State game. I know that's the game, right? Some people would say that's more important than the college football playoff. I can't imagine having a rivalry that's that important, but I've heard Ohio State and Michigan fans say that. So I do think Michigan will win, but I think Illinois will cover. But I've got the Wolverines at home. USC and UCLA, this is a rivalry game. Home game for the Bruins. USC favored on the road by 2.5. I like USC to win. I like them to cover the number. Oregon and Utah, the Ducks, rumored to be strongly in the running for Caden Proctor now, potentially flipping from Iowa to Oregon. If you missed my video earlier in the week on that subject, you can check that out here at the top of the screen, right? No, other side. I'll throw that up there for you to look at. But I've got Utah winning at home. They're favored by 2. I've got them winning. I've got them covering. And 2 straight losses for the Ducks coming out that loss to Washington. TCU and Baylor. Talk about playoff. TCU very much alive for the playoff. They need to win out. Tough game on the road at Baylor. TCU 2.5-point favorites. I like the Horned Frogs to win. Max Dugan, the Iowa native from Council Bluffs, leading the Horned Frogs through an undefeated season. I like TCU in both categories. Tennessee and South Carolina. Tennessee 22.5-point favorites. I like Tennessee to cover that number. I think they're explosive enough on offense. I think they go into Columbia and absolutely destroy the Gamecocks. They win easily. Miami and Clemson. The Tigers 19.5-point favorites at home. I like Miami to cover the number. I'm not real confident on that, but I like them to cover the number. I think Clemson wins straight up. They are the home team. Georgia and Kentucky. Kentucky coming off one of the worst losses in their program history against Vanderbilt, who hadn't won a SEC game in years. I've got Georgia winning that game. I've got Kentucky covering. I still think they'll be resilient. They're too well coached under Mark Stoops. Defensive-minded team. I think they will bounce back after that horrendous loss. They cover, and I'm pretty confident in it. Ohio State and Maryland. Maryland, of course, the 27.5-point favorites. They've kind of trailed off after a strong start. That's pretty much routine for the Terrapins. They seem to just kind of fade as the season goes on. I like Ohio State to win this game. I'll take Maryland to cover. It's a big number, 27.5. Not real confident in it, but I'll take Maryland. Oklahoma State and OU. The Sooners taking on their in-state rivals, the Cowboys of Oklahoma State. I like Okie State to win on the road, upset Oklahoma. Shouldn't be an upset. Oklahoma State is ranked right now. They've had some weird games late in the season, game to Kansas State, game to Kansas, but I do think they'll bounce back. I think they did bounce back last week as well. I think they go on the road and win in Soonerville. North Carolina State and Louisville. Louisville 4.5-point favorites. I like the Wolfpack to win. Of course, they will cover. And then Stanford taking on Cal. Cal, the 5-point favorites. I don't know how you pick Cal in any game. I'll take Stanford. Both these teams not very good in that Pac-12 conference. Pac-12 is not very good in general. I'll take Stanford to win. I like them to cover. All right, folks. Iowa and Minnesota. The game that biggest game of the season. I mean, pretty clear. Obviously, if they win this week, then next week becomes the biggest game of the season. And Kirk would say every game in that week is the biggest game of the season. But the West is riding on Iowa winning and on Illinois losing. Purdue and Minnesota not out of the equation either. And I don't think Wisconsin's out of the equation, although they'll need a lot of help. We talked about the keys to this game. Again, if you missed my preview, I'll put it up here in the corner for you to check out. You can click on that preview as well. I am intrigued to see what the crowd is like. Obviously, can Mo Ibrahim get a 19th straight 100-plus rushing game, 100-plus yard rushing game against Iowa, or I should say for Minnesota this week against Iowa? And can Iowa hold him down to a point where they force Calic Manis to throw the football? I don't think Tanner Morgan's playing this weekend. Calic Manis is a young guy who hasn't had a lot of time, struggled to throw the football against a bad Northwestern defense last week. I actually, here's the deal. I've picked Purdue and I picked Wisconsin these last 2 weeks. I was not counting on Iowa's defense and special teams unit being as dominant as it was last week, even though Iowa's defense has been terrific, especially since the bye week. I did not expect them to hold Braylon Allen down like they did. And I certainly, you can't account for a pick six from Cooper DeJean, a block punt that puts your offense inside the 20, and a big return from Cooper DeJean in the punt game inside the 20. All right. They set up Iowa's offense literally twice and scored the other touchdown. So that could always happen. That's hard to predict. But I'll say this. Iowa's defense has a knack for kind of going against the odds, the probabilities, if you will, the law of averages. That's the term people like in the sports world like to use. Obviously, this is a very low over-under. It was like 32.5 last time I checked. I don't see either team scoring a lot of points, but if you're going to look at one team that has an opportunity or they'd be primed to turn defensive plays into points, it's probably Iowa. Now, Minnesota's secondary has been really good this year. Again, if you missed any of my numbers, my stats to follow, I mentioned that in my preview, mentioned those stats in my preview. But I think you got to take Iowa right now. Two offenses that are struggling. Although Ibrahim has ran well, Iowa's rush defense has been superb. If there's one passing offense that's been worse than Iowa in Big Ten play, I don't think there really has been. If there is, the argument could be made that Minnesota has been worse, especially with Tanner Morgan out. They can't throw the football. Who's going to say they're going to throw the football well in cold, frigid, windy temperatures on Saturday? So here's the deal, folks. I got Iowa winning 13-10. The Hawkeyes win in Minneapolis and stay alive for the West Division. It will be a narrow win unless the turnovers snowball for Minnesota. And I suppose Iowa could turn the ball over as well. We've seen Spencer struggle. Those will be the key numbers to follow. We talked about rushing offense, rush defense, but who turns the ball over, right? I mean, because points are going to be hard to come by all day. I've got Iowa 13, Minnesota 10. The Hawkeyes hang on to the Floyd of Rosedale. Appreciate you tuning in for another segment, my Week 12 picks, including my Iowa-Minnesota pick. A reminder that I'll be live with Coach Don Patterson following the game, taking your calls, taking your chats, following the game on Saturday, which begins at 3 p.m. Central Time on Fox. It's Iowa postgame with Coach Don Patterson right here from the Hawkeye of the Storm.